migration is becoming a global challenge. How can you make sure that migrants are integrated at the best in their destination countries?
Hi, I'm Estelle. How do we feed the population that will reach 9 billion in 2050 without putting too much pressure in our ecosystem?
Climate change will cause a redistribution of water around the globe. How will the international community make sure that food and hydropower production remain unchanged in the next decade?
Hello, my name is Simon. I'm concerned about the fact that people continue to live in large cities in areas prone to natural disasters. How can we make sure that people are aware of and prepare for these risks?
Hi, I'm Nikolai, and I have a question. How can we raise awareness among men on all levels of our society of gender equality issues, and how can we sensitize them on to the importance of empowered women for the prosperity of our world?
Okay. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a great lunch and that everything is going well. So I am very excited to be moderating, of course, and chairing a very exciting panel. This panel is called The Power of Youth, and it's an interview with two change makers. So let me begin by introducing change maker number one. Ladies first.
Before we start, not for me, but before we start, I want to ask a little favor from our audience. Can we all stand up?
Including us?
Yeah.
Oh, let's all stand up. Okay.
Please. And thank you. I wasn't expecting that everybody stand up.
Amazing.
So it's a good thing.
Excellent.
So please turn the person next to you, probably the ones that you don't know, and like have this little eye contact.
Hi. Really a pleasure to meet you and look into your eyes.
And this is the thing. And please congratulate him, her, and each other for being here for 2 days and actually working towards a better world and get to know each other.
In Turkish. Tebrikler.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for being here. Yes. Tebrikler. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, because we are a global. See how the interaction has started.
Yeah.
Change makers.
Yeah, we need to sense each other on a regular basis. I think I don't have the sound.
Yeah.
No sound? Is this sound working?
Yeah. Try. Talk.
I was saying that actually on regular basis as change makers we need to sense each other, and eye contact is the first step actually to sense each other and to start a collaboration. And let's jump to the topic.
What a wonderful introduction. I'm blown away. I'm sure you all are as well. So, yeah, let me look into your eyes and introduce you as change maker number one, Duygu Kambur, head of strategy at Image. Round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Change maker two, I've been practicing his name for a long time, Buğra Çelik, director of Image. A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Now, just very quickly, introduce yourselves. Who are you? What do you do? And then we're going to watch a video to see them in action. So, okay, please. Men first.
Okay, thank you. My name is Buğra. I work at Image. Actually, I'm also an entrepreneur since 18 years old. But I feel like I'm more of a movement of this millennials, Y generation, that we are looking for a purposeful work. The things that we do, we are looking for some meaning out of it. So this is how I come across with Image.
Okay, wonderful. Duygu.
Yeah, I was also those millennials who is looking for meaning in the work, and I was working in a corporation actually, And then I realized that the entrepreneurial mindset is not very welcome in big corporations. And I was looking for the impact that I can create while I'm working. And then I quit my job and I went to a journey through education. I took a master in innovation management and entrepreneurship, and this is where I actually come across with social innovation and entrepreneurship, and it was like a wow moment for me to see the potential within the problems and with an entrepreneurial mindset, and how we can transform those negativities into the business models and into the good things while working. And this is also how I decided to come back to Turkey, because I was
where were you?
I was in Berlin for my education. And this is how I decided to come back to Turkey when everybody was trying to move out the country.
Excellent. What a brave person to quit your job and launch yourself into the unknown, basically.
Yeah, and when I come back, I also come across Image, and this is how we started to change the world a little bit in Image.
But in a nutshell, Image is an incubation hub, correct?
Yeah. Actually, it's we call it social innovation platform, but all these jargons, all these terminology, what we are trying to do is finding these change makers and bring them with resources to tackle these social and environmental challenges.
Fantastic. Time to see them in action. Let's play a video to see them in their natural habitat.
Image is the child of 3 different organizations. One of those is Atölye, the other one is Zorlu Holding, and the other one is S360.
What we're trying to do in Image is, with the right people, with the change makers, how might we change these organizations to create social and environmental impact?
We are mainly focusing on incubation program, which is designed for social enterprises. And in our incubation program, we are targeting SDGs, and we are supporting the entrepreneurs who are working on SDGs field.
Sustainable development goals have also a financial aspect of it. So we need financial resources, not only the good projects, change makers, but also the financial resources that we need. So my concern about the private sector, are they going to be able to change their mindset of competitive way of doing the business to more collaborative way of doing business?
I want to raise the question to the participant that how we can actually create a real collaboration within the corporations, so their efforts can be more effective in social innovation field in Turkey.
Okay, there you go. Now, I want to kick off by asking, how does the work you do relate to the topic we're talking about, the SDGs, and why is it so significant, and why should we all care? Duygu.
Okay. First of all, in Image, we have 3 pillars that we are trying to focus on. The first one is the capacity building, the second one, the community building around social innovation. And the incubation program is our 3rd effort, and in incubation program we are designing the whole program according to social sustainable development goals. And the incubation program that we are running is 7 months, and each month, in each cycle, we are targeting one of the goals, and we are having a call to the social enterprises who are working on those fields. In the first cycle, we worked on quality education goal, and then the second one, now we are in running the gender equality process, and we are working with the 10 teams who are trying to find different solutions to the gender equality issues. Mm-hmm. So this is how it is related to sustainable development goals, and it's also giving a framework for all of our partners that it's creating a neutral area it's creating a discussion opportunity for all partners that what we are doing, because if you have SDGs, such a compass, it's actually very easy to understand for all partners what we are doing.
Excellent. So you incubate for 7 months. Okay. Yeah. And why is it so significant?
Actually, right now, what we are witnessing, what we are seeing in the world is that we are doing things collectively that threatens our existence. And when we look at the history, we are not here because of we were like fastest or strongest. The things that we got here was the collaborative work to overcome all these challenges. And actually the image is the representation of this collaboration. In Anatolia, we have this one word for the collaborative efforts to solve the community's shared problems. So this is actually...
what is that word?
Image.
And image means collaboration, right?
Yes, collaborative work to take care of the challenges, to tackle of the challenges. So this is what we are doing actually, how we can redefine the image word as a concept in 21st century.
Okay, so how is the private sector helping you? We had 4 very heavyweights from the private sector here on stage before. They talked a lot about what they're doing. Are they really helping you?
Yeah, actually...
or not them in particular, but other private sector companies.
One of our co-founders is Zorlu Holding. Zorlu Holding is one of the biggest family conglomerate in Turkey right now. And they were looking for new ways, sustainable ways to invest their corporate social responsibility budgets. So this is how we met actually. So now when we look at it, as we started with millennials, right? Now all these corporations have millennials coming to the managerial position, and also for these wealthy families. Now there's millennials in their boards. So we are lucky in the Zorlu Holding. The whole corporation is really serious about trying to see that change with the society. So, and Emre Zorlu is also our champion in the family. We call him and we ask him, okay, let's go to other corporations. Let's go to other families to invite them to Image and to work together.
Great. So you have one of Turkey's biggest companies, and you have one of the top people just there at the end of the line helping you. Okay, now let's talk about specifics, case studies, examples. Give me some success stories. Who have you helped in these 7 months of incubation here in Turkey?
Yeah. I can give an example from the process that we are in right now, the teams from the working on gender equality issues. One of those teams called Kızlar Sahada. And Kızlar Sahada is a social enterprise empowering the girls through the soccer game. The founder of Kızlar Sahada, Melis, disturbing the male-oriented field, the soccer field, by creating a space for the girls as well. And she is now creating an academy for the girls.
This is a football academy for girls. Football, by the way, of course. Really?
Yeah.
Excellent.
And when they are on the field, the girls, the young girls on the field, actually it is the time that they realize actually the football is not a male-oriented sport, and the sport has not a gender at all. And this is how they actually questioning the all gender roles, which is like directed from the society all the time through their ages, through their young ages. And this is how they actually reject the gender roles from their young ages. So we are seeing this social enterprise mission very important, and supporting them to create this academy for the girls. And the other one can be Kök Basmane. They are now creating an interaction environment for refugees, for refugee and local women in Izmir, and they are now creating a business model for them how they can work together and create a wealth for their own environment. And they are working with collaborating with the municipalities as well. So it's going to be something new, I guess. I hope if we can manage this model in this specific space in Izmir, then we can have this blueprint in other cities to create interaction space for the refugee and local women to earn their own money through their model.
Excellent. 3 million refugees here. That's an incredible success story.
The pattern that we have here, all these success stories, these entrepreneurs, they are coming from the field. They know what is the problem. For example, with the Kök Basmane, that refugee women, displaced women, and the local women coming together, the team, they used to work in the border of Syria. They have this war gastronomy strategy. They work with the women escaping from Syria, and they are doing therapeutical kitchen work.
Amazing.
So with that experience, now they want to scale to other cities. So
and how will that scale now? Is that being looked into?
Actually, that's the thing. In our incubation program,
this is what we are trying to do now. We're going to have pilot version in Izmir, and then we want to scale it with them, of course.
Amazing, absolutely amazing. And there was another one we talked about yesterday, a virtual space library. Tell me about that. I love that example.
Actually, one of our change maker, he's this young teacher, and he was working in far east side of the Turkey, far east side of the Anatolia, with the 5,000 students in one small school. He realized that the things that he mandate that to teach to them is nothing that kids are interested in. These the questions, the curiosity wasn't there. So
there's no curiosity at school. That's
yes,
what the teacher was seeing among the students. Okay. Yes. So how did he tackle this?
And then he came up with this method. Basically, the kids are in charge of the classroom, and they are collecting their interests, their questions, and they are matching each other. So this is the way they are creating their own content. They are creating their own education system. And now in 7 government school around Anatolia, they are testing, prototyping this.
Education bottom up.
Yes.
Amazing.
And one of the projects that these kids developed was they built a space library, basically Astro library, and they occupy a empty space in the school, and they turn it to the library, and the books in the library is written by the kids as well.
So kids writing books. Amazing. Now, my last question before we open up the floor to questions. What does success on the road to 2030 for your organization look like, and what obstacles could you face? Duygu.
It's actually kind of a hard and not a hard question to answer. I would say that...
and be frank, speak openly.
Yeah.
Don't
hesitate.
I will.
Are you ready?
Yeah, we're all ready.
To be able to create decentralized learning communities, tackling the social issues by entrepreneurial approach. This is the thing that we want to scale over the region, over the time, because we need change makers all over the places who are actually tackling their own problems. So we want to first empower them with our tools and training programs, so they can actually sense what is the real problem in their local environment and how can they approach it with collaborative way. So scaling over the region with this approach will be the success for us.
Just very, very quickly before I ask you about this, is there a culture of entrepreneurship in Turkey? Or is there, I know I come from 2 countries, in one of mine, the UK, everyone starts a business, or there's such support for entrepreneurs. My other country, Spain, there is such a sense of failure is not an option, unlike Elon Musk says, and there isn't that entrepreneurship. What is it like in Turkey? Is there, go, start your own company. If you have an idea, go, do it.
Actually, we have, comparing the region, we have a entrepreneur ecosystem, but it's growing slowly right now. Government has a lot of supports to the ecosystem, but what we are trying to do is to change entrepreneur mindset, not to focus on a e-commerce or mobile app that nobody is going to probably not to use. But
in 2030,
yeah, let's focus on the real problems that needs to be solved through entrepreneur.
Okay, and answering my question, roadblocks to achieving success in 2030, and what does 2030 success look like for you? Very briefly, 10 seconds.
Actually, like the trouble that the question is, are we going to able to fast enough to collaborate effectively to bring meaningful change? This is the question. Like, is this going to be fast enough before 2030? So
maybe it's not long enough then, you think? Not enough years?
Yeah, but we need to act really fast, and we need scale. That's why private sector or governments are really important to bring that scale.
So if you're listening, governments, private sector, you've heard it here. Right. Questions, please. Don't all jump at once. Any questions from the audience? You've got a great example of millennial entrepreneurship here in Turkey, a country of 70 million people. No questions. Oh, one question from the front. Please identify yourself first and question, not statement.
Thanks. Hello, my name is Afshan Khan. I'm with UNICEF. I was very interested in what you raised about building a culture of entrepreneurship, and you mentioned your astrolab at school. What do you think it would take to cultivate that in schools in Turkey, that whole sense of how do we create a problem-solving type of mindset in schools?
Perfect question. The solution that we are working on right now to scale this is actually the community of the teachers. Right now, almost all of our projects in our pipeline are building a community for their cause. So, for example, the Space Library has this network of teachers. They are exchanging their best practices, their learnings, and now we see these teachers taking this concept to their own school. So basically, instead of waiting for the state to act on it, so it's better to have real cases than go to the government. So basically, the community, power of the community.
All right. Any other questions? Over here.
Hello, my name is Seçil. I'm coming from Bahçeşehir University Co-op Directorate. So what I would like to ask is that maybe like the Unilever example. So what they do, as Mr. Harm expressed, they go to the primary schools and just enlighten these kids about the hygienical education, etc. So just because at the beginning of the conference, as mentioned, by 2025, 75% of the millennials will form the professional life. So I was wondering what kind of action you plan, maybe just to widen this approach to the maybe high school and university students. Thank you.
Should I start with
the youth?
Yeah.
Actually, this is also a question in our mind. Was a question in our mind how we gonna spread this spirit to the youth, to make them feel that they have another option, not just the corporations, not just the traditional entrepreneurship, but doing business and also creating an impact, creating a social good. And now we are working closely with the high school and university students to create a roadmap together to have this decentralized change maker youth community over the high schools and the universities. So in soon, I hope, we will be launching this project as well with different high schools and universities.
And actually, the millennials at the workforce are critically important for us, because when a corporation talks about the change, it becomes not marketing anymore, because they can't lie to their own employees, which they want to see a change. So this is one of our theory of change, actually, to create an employee engagement program to change that organization for good.
Excellent. All right, let's bring this to a close now. Thank you very much.
Thank you
for this very exciting and really showing a different side of Turkey, of SDGs that I think many of us may not have known about. So thank you very much. Please join me in giving a round of applause to this panel. Thank you.
Thank you for having us here.
And now we will prepare for the fifth panel. So we're going to change the stage, so do bear with us for a few moments. All right. Thank you so much.
رجالة تعالي نشون بلاسكم نتنالا سجن بلاسني
ما قاعدين نفكروا زماننا شوفوا عنا دول أخواننا دول درس لجينا فكرناهم عشان دولنا ما مشينا هناك ده دولنا فرقنا ما مدقن يفتشوا
وشفنا جيراننا واد كلها قاعد توش إسلامي كتيرين كي
نفي الناس نتطور ما شفنا ده كل واحد لقيته شفتها إمي إيسا قلنا إيسا
Paski anjun muiban dunia ni tuyo se pasa como muiban
internet ده ممكن كان زول بدور بس يفتش أهلا ويسلموا كان قاعدين بإيدين كده يسلموا ويقول لهم المكان ده يهولوا منا انترنت
هلا أنا هندسة عمارة، فبالنسبة إلي كان إيكيا هي المكان اللي بيعني لي كتير، لأن أنا بالأصل بالنسبة إلي هو مثل المتحف خلينا نقول، فوين ما سافرت دائما بدور على إيكيا لأنه بحب طريقة الشغل تبعها، العرض.
Una buena oportunidad para mí aprender muchísimas cosas y como antes no trabajaba en España, entonces es como un primer paso para empezar nueva vida.
Okay, this looks ready to me. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for our fifth panel of the day. And now it's time to hear from the world of academia and innovation for their perspective on sustainable development. And first of all, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Mili Begovic, the UNDP Innovation Specialist. Welcome, Millie. Take your seat. And our panelists. We have a panelist that is not new to the stage already. I'll introduce him. Buğra Çelik from Imager, the director, who we've just heard from, wearing another hat. And then Indi Johar from Dark Matters Laboratories. Welcome.
Lovely.
And finally, Fikret Adaman from Boğaziçi University, the Human Development Center. Welcome.
Hello. Supposed to turn it on. I guess I'm not that technologically advanced as innovation would lead you to believe. So how is everybody? Good. Yeah? Woo! And so. We'll see at the end how you guys clap. So this panel is meant to be a bit of a provocation. Not provocation for the provocation's sake, but provocation because increasingly we've been hearing voices that claim that SDGs are really the symptoms of symptoms, not necessarily the causes of the issues facing the humanity, that they're sort of akin to the accounting methodology and monitoring of how well we're doing, and are not actually addressing the key reasons and drivers of issues that are facing the world. So we wanted to acknowledge those voices and have a bit of a discussion about various pieces of that. Now, before we get into that, I wanted to address one thing before. I know that there are a couple of people in the audience right now waiting to raise their hand and challenge the fact that we have a panel with 3 men. Initially, we had the Professor Wen, who's going to speak at 5 p.m. via teleconference. She was meant to be a part of this panel, but due to the last-minute change, we had to shift things around. So I hope you will forgive us for being somewhat gender imbalanced in this respect. So without any further ado, I would like to first, Buddha, you've been talking to the audience a little bit, but one particular aspect that I would like to talk to you about is the fact that SDG sort of, their premise is that we need all hands on deck. We need all of the expertise and all of the knowledge around in a given country and across the world to even have a hope of achieving them. But if we look at the way governments relate to citizens, some would argue that the engagement mechanism is really broken. That the way, the world has moved on from citizens voting and commenting on sort of zero drafts of different policies. And there is some research that points to that. In 2017, Endelman Trust Barometer showed that the trust in some of the key institutions in the society, the media, the NGOs, the government, is not only at an all-time low, but declining. What can you tell us from your experience in the work of IMEDGE about this interface and engagement between the citizens and governments?
Actually, the funny thing about that research is... Oh, not this one? Thank you. In that research, we see that CEOs' trust level is higher than NGOs. Like when you think about it, like how can we trust the CEOs more than the NGOs? So we need to think about it. What is the reason that that is happening? So, but in the field, we see this when we meet with the people, like community of practices, like teachers or the students, we see that they are really eager to come together and work through their own problems. So one of the upside of all these trust issues that it creates that nobody expects anything from these institutions anymore. So in Turkey we had this don't expect everything from government thing. Right now nobody expects anything from these institutions actually. But I think with this millennials, new generation, we have new hope that they might change these organizations, because even if these small scale interventions, small scale experiments are very critical, but still for this scale we need an organizational change, and it needs to be done very quickly.
So you guys at IMEDGE have been doing some really interesting things about identifying the expertise and insights from the citizens about some of the issues that we talk about in the context of SDGs. Could you talk a little bit about what have you been doing and how have you tried to fix the fact that the engagement between the governments and the citizens seems to have been broken?
In Image, we have this incubation program, and what we're trying to do there, we have an open call, and we ask the passionate people with the problem to go out there and try to understand the problem better. So what it does, that it makes them get connect with these people actually, and it creates a community. And we are lucky to be in a co-working space. It's basically an innovation studio. We have a lot of multidisciplinary talents there. So after some level of trust built between these people, we will have the NGOs coming, or the government is coming to be part of this solution, because they see there's a momentum there towards that solution. So it's easier to mobilize people in a concrete project, concrete product. So that's our experience actually.
Could you just give us, before moving on to the next question, thank you. Before moving on to the next question, could you maybe give us an example of a solution that has come from?
For example, one of our projects that we are working with is from young teachers, but they have insight that the teachers, when they graduated from the school, they are starting to lose their interest on new technologies, and the system, the education system, creates an seriously slowing them down. So what they did, they built this platform that the teachers are exchanging their best practices. So because there are a lot of good examples, but they were on silos, like they weren't meeting together. So now they have both a platform and community. And the good thing is now they are in touch with the government right now. So how they can implement this more scale.
Thank you so much. Professor Adaman, a question for you. There are some who argue that SDGs with hundreds of targets and indicators are a perfect bureaucratic box-ticking exercise. And in the way that they're presented, they don't necessarily capture the complexity of the issues that the world is facing. Could you tell us a little bit about the work of the Human Development Center in terms of managing the friction between the way the SDGs are pronounced and the actual realities on the ground that people face? Bura's role is to manage our microphones this hour.
Yeah, thank you. I think you are completely right in suggesting that we should go to the backstage and see, what's happening there, what's happening in the kitchen, because SDGs are, if I may say so, the end results, what you are eating, what you are drinking. But you need to, in a sense, go to the kitchen and see, what's happening there. Well, I mean, you asked us to be provocative, so let me start with suggesting two terms that I think may of importance for the current discussion that this audience is having. The first one is the term commoning, which is a verb recently, sort of in the last 5-6 years, developed from the term the commons. And it has lots to do with what Bora and his team have been doing so far. And Image could easily be translated as the act of commoning. Well, I think the audience will quickly remember Gary Hardin's famous or infamous 1968 article, the short article, The Tragedy of the Commons, in which he suggested that, people by and large will not be able to use in a sustainable manner their resources, and at the end of the day, deluge the tragedy, and so therefore, governments should do something. Well, this argument was later challenged by Öström the very first woman who got a Nobel Prize in economics. So perhaps, the gender issue, is to be mentioned here. Together with a Turkish colleague, Fikret Berkez, based in Canada, and their teams, who figure out that, well, there are situations in which people may come together and manage their resources in a sustainable manner. So how come that, this has been happening? So when they look at the issue in a more deeper way, then they have observed that in societies where you have solidaristic networks, trust-based sort of relationships, they are perfectly capable and able to properly, sustainably manage their natural resources. And so in the last 5-7 years, the term commoning has been proposed in academic circles, which denotes the combination of all kinds of relations and practices around the commons. So, I think what IMEC has been doing can easily be explained by this term, and therefore I would suggest that we should look at the recently emerging literature on the commoning. So this is my first point. My second point is that, to be even more provocative, we should really challenge, without fear, the fetishism of growth. Almost the only game in town is the growth rate per capita. What's your rate? What's mine? What's this government? And so on and so forth. And more or less, the majority of discussions have been indexed to the growth figures. Well, we know that what UNDP has been doing, we know that the 17 indices that we have make a challenge to this vision, but still growth has a kind of hegemonic power onto us. And so therefore I would urge everyone to think once again whether this is the right way to go. And I would also like to urge the audience to take a closer look to the, again, recently emerging literature on the degrowth movement, the décroissance, where the idea of growing without taking into account social and ecological costs is being challenged. So, I would stop here by simply suggesting that we should be considering the two terms commoning and degrowth more seriously. Thank you.
Before moving on to Indy, just a question. So James Scott, in his book Seeing Like a State,
exactly, yes,
talked about about the fact that states have an issue of legibility. They're simply not organized in a way that they can read the complexity of some of the issues that they're dealing with. So the way to deal with it, they create boxes and they create taxonomies. But no bureaucrat can be fast enough to create boxes to slot everything that's happening in the pace of progress, basically. So what, in the context of the growth fetishism, I almost said growth fascism, growth fetishism, what would be your suggestion to members of the government who are in the audience today, in terms of how do you structure, how do you organize yourselves to be able to see better the complexity and to be able to break this paradigm of growth into something that's going to get us to live longer on this planet Earth?
Has there been a Freudian slip, perhaps? Well, I mean, you are again very right in pointing out that state machineries, if I'm allowed to use this term, need tools to establish their hegemonic power, and reference to growth figures can easily sort of fill a few boxes that you have mentioned. Now the question is whether we are, as citizens, as NGO members, and certainly as private sector, as academia, are we really satisfied with these boxes? I mean, we do have to ask this question first to ourselves, and for example, start questioning whether there is any kind of relationship between happiness and growth. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Indy, moving on to a different set of questions and dissenting voices that we've been hearing about SDGs. So today we're witnesses of a couple of countries for whom that are considered to be beacons of democracy, who for all intents and purposes have things that we consider democratic. They have checks and balances, they have representative governance, they have governments, they have due process, but the policies coming out may not necessarily be in line with the spirit of what one would consider to be a democracy. We have that reality on one hand, and then we have SDGs as a framework for growth and development that may not necessarily be able to address this almost double reality that we're dealing with. What do you have to say about that?
So, big question. I think there's something fundamental going on in a sense that I agree with you that the SDGs themselves are the outputs of the kitchen, and we have to go back into the kitchen. And I think the same is true for the issues of what I would call 20th century democracies. In a way, I think there is a structural issue about what does governance look like. And I no longer think that 20th century democracies are able to deal with the scale of technological transformation that's going on that is undermining and changing the very nature of how we organize. So the bureaucratic revolution that we saw in Germany, which gave rise to the modern state as we know it, is actually being transformed by a new class of bureaucratic revolution. That bureaucratic revolution is undermining the tools and mechanisms of good governance, of good behavior, all of the stuff that we thought was right. Also, I think transparency is articulating the divergence between the discussed reality and the factual reality. So the UK, women's wages, sort of gender wage imbalance is now publicly transparent for many corporates. And so very soon you find out even the best corporations have got at least 30 to 40% deviation between what men and women are being paid. So there's a divergence between the reality and the discourse, and that divergence is becoming much more factual. Then finally you have science, which is undermining many of the conversations and the rhetorics. So meritocracy as an idea has been a conceptual frame for our current economic movement. You are all equal. If I give you all equal opportunities, you will do all equally well. Well, science is telling us that's just bollocks. There's no reality to that. Epigenetics means that actually effects of inequality are transmitted. Our brain is a social brain. We are a part of the networks that we sit in. My position is only really my position because of the nature of the conferences I have and the conversations I have. I'm not some genius, neither is anyone else here. So when we start to see these things, what we're starting to see is undermining at a structural level of some of the things we thought were useful. And also it starts to reimagine nepotism. What does nepotism look like? What does corruption look like? What does legitimacy look like? All these things are being undermined. And I think what you're seeing is the first generation democracies now being absolutely undermined at that level. And that, I think, is a challenge everywhere. So if you ask me what the issue is, I think the real issue is that we aren't inventing the institutions of tomorrow. We are not creating the institutional infrastructure of tomorrow. We are too happy, and certainly for many years, we've been happy fixing the markets of the edge. So if you want to know real revolution is accounting revolution. Double entry bookkeeping changed the world. And I think we're about to hit some really interesting accounting revolutions. So Gibson, which is a city in Canada, has put an aquifer on the balance balance of a public authority, a city, balance sheet of a city. That fundamentally changes how we look after natural assets. So we are about to see these structural transformations. And my slight worry is, over the last few years, we've been absolutely happy to patch problems where the problems are. Actually, we haven't been happy to go back into the system to really argue about fundamentals. So is welfare a cost or is it an investment? This is not an ideological debate, it's a technical debate as well. If we see welfare as investment, we see humans as a source of wealth and generosity and value, whereas if we see welfare as a cost, we see humans as an overhead. So these are the sort of conceptual struggles I think we're right now in the middle of, and I think the debate, and this is where UNDP can show great leadership, is what does this debate look like? What does the future of governance look like? What does the future of institutions look like? How do we perceive human value? What is the machine-to-machine economy going to mean for humans? What does the legitimacy look like? All of these things, they're up for grabs. And my worry is that we'll be fixing 20th century problems in a world where 21st century is rapidly grabbing hold of a whole new economy in a way that will be unbreakable, that if we don't get to address it.
So, building on that, we have 12 years to fix SDGs. Or rather to pursue and solve for SDGs. But the first iPhone came out just a little over 10 years ago. And it fundamentally changed the way our work-life balance is, the way we communicate, the way we engage and relate to other people. So presumably 10 years from now, there might be a whole load of other issues that we may not be capturing in the framework that we have for today. Right? So the future of identity, the fact that with a very inexpensive DIY toolkit I can hack my own body, what does that mean for the future of identity and sovereignty, for example? The changing face of asymmetrical warfare. Could one claim that what Cambridge Analytica has done is the changing face of that psychological warfare? So what we worry about is whether by looking at 2030, we don't look at 2035. And whether by looking at 2035 or 2050, we could be getting some low-hanging fruits that can help us address the issue of the commons, for example.
Obviously, I get why 2030 is useful. I totally understand that. But I also agree with you that I think the world is not going to end in 2030, and the reality is the SDGs aren't going to be achieved in 2030. Like, undiscussed reality, we can't admit it. Nobody say that outside this room. But
just, can I be rude and interrupt you just for a second? Does anybody believe that who believes that by 2030 we will have achieved SDGs?
One, good, okay, good. So,
box of chocolates for you after the panel. Right. It's striking. I've been in a number of these conferences over the last 6 months, and there has been a handful, only a handful, of people who raise their hand at this question. And these are individuals who are at the forefront of governments, multinational financial institutions, multinational development institutions. In other words, individuals who have leverage and access to influence and power to help solve some of these issues. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. I just wanted to
thank you for illustrating it. Thank you for illustrating that point. And my point is actually builds exactly on that. You are the smartest people in the region, right, and globally. So if you don't believe it, let me turn the whole question around. What would make you believe it? What would you need to be doing to believe you could achieve that? So it's possible to achieve it, no doubt. It's not impossible. We've done more extraordinary things like going to the moon in a shorter period of time. So the question is, what is the transformation required to believe it? And I think that to me is the key question. I don't think we're dreaming the right dreams. I think we're dreaming fixes. We're dreaming side projects and ancillary projects. If you want to dream this, well, we have to raise $2.5 trillion a year. That's what we need. Who's doing capital formation of $2.5 trillion a year? That's the scale of money we need to be able to do the infrastructure development. If we want to dream this, we have to change accounting. We know that's going to be the game. So where's the future of accounting project, which has really got every nation involved? Where's the future of governance project? Because we know, unless we deal with governance and externalities, which are going to be corporate, national, individual, all of this stuff is going to come to the table. The future of governance is right now on the table. It is more critical, and I think will be the biggest project over the next 20 to 30 years than it's ever been. So if you want to drive, if you want to manifest the reality that we all believe in, I think we have to look strategically much more big, in a much bigger way, in a much bolder way. It is possible. I don't think it's impossible, but I don't think we're playing at the right scale.
I have one more question for Burak, but before getting to that, Indy, the Owen Barder, the director for Center for Global Development for Europe, tweeted a couple of months ago. He says, "We're being frog-marched to driverless cars and flying cars. What I want to see is carless cities." The subtext, obviously, being with innovation, we see a lot of shiny things, but they're not really necessarily unleashed at or helping address issues like inequality and changing climate and what have you.
Yeah.
What are some of the implications of this for governments who are trying to reassemble different pieces of insights and knowledge into a smarter whole, addressing some of the most pressing problems that they're dealing with?
Can I go? So first thing is to believe, right? So what is Uber reinvent? It reinvented the cab office. That's all it did. It's the cab office. What has government done? Well, we built. What did we do? We did nationalized planning rights in the UK, we built the NHS, we built votes. You've done large-scale structural transformation. UNDP itself was critical as part of development of Singapore. You've done scales of transformation that Uber is playing at the edges of. So the first thing is, how do you believe you can do something is really important. Second thing for me, and I think this is important, we mustn't let the dreaming be done only by Silicon Valley. If the only dream in the room is Elon Musk being beautifully eloquent in front of you, then I think you've already lost. And the question is, where's the dream? Right? How are you going to take us forward as a civilization? And that dream has to be on the table. So I think firstly, believe in the power of the state. State is a very powerful instrument. Look back at history, at the scale of revolutions that have been driven, real welfare revolutions that have been driven by the state. Secondly, also believe that actually, what is the dream, really? And the dream is not just about fixing problems. I think we have to create a real positivist dream. And I think that challenge has to not only be driven by Silicon Valley. I think we have to democratize the capacity to dream. What is Turkey's science fiction, right? I want to see that. That's what I want to see. It doesn't all have to be driven by Star Trek in the 1960s.
Thank you. I'm jealous. That got a much bigger clap than I asked for. Very good. All right, so Burak, coming back to the local level, there was a really nice blog post last week from the Engine Room. It said, when the public service delivery fails, life goes on. And the subtext of the piece was, things don't work in many places around the world, people go on. They have coping mechanisms to deal with lack of access to justice, inequality, poverty, and so on and so forth. Through your work with Imece, what have you found in terms of identifying some of those coping mechanisms, and what do you think the potential of that is for informing some of the back office policy making that governments are thinking about in the context of SDGs?
Indy beautifully put it, like, I think people are finding their own innovative ways to cope the situation or find solutions. And the question is, how are we going to fund these small innovations, not the ones, the huge, the moonshot projects only, but what we witness in the field that, for example, youth, we are working with young people to see, like, for example, for us, the government is not always that we are in touch with, but for these students, they see that failed education system every day. So, but we see that they come together and they build this peer-to-peer learning or network. So, like 3 of them, they are coming together, they go there, they ask interview from Fikret, from Indy, and they are taking that information that is not available in any institution, and they are distributing that information through their network. This is the high school students. Sorry.
We're like the worst man.
So the other coping mechanism is also that, like, for example, a lot of the information that we need to have right now, like the blockchain, like the artificial intelligence, these are not available in any institution. So we see a lot of peer-to-peer learning networks that they are grabbing that information and distributing to their network. So this is one of the things.
Thank you so much. That inspired me. Last question for me for Professor Adaman. At 5 o'clock, we're going to hear from the Michigan University professor, Wen Wen, who just did a really nice piece of research around China, how China climbed out of poverty. And one of the critical tenets of what she found really challenges the way that many development organizations have approached governance. A lot of the work has been premised on build institutions first, and then focus on the more sophisticated policy stuff. What her research showed that is the weak or maybe more flexible institutions that allow for variations of many different ways in which we get to crack a problem that we know very little about, and that help filter the really interesting solutions that can make the dial move. Now, this is quite a paradigm shift including for UNDP. Have you done any research along the lines of this dichotomy of strong versus weak or flexible institution? Land Pritchett calls this isomorphic mimicry, right? So governments really learning to play the game of development, mimicking certain reforms instead of doing them fundamentally in order to get loans or grants or support from outside.
Well, I mean, by and large, participatory mechanisms, I mean, institutions where strong hierarchies do not exist, usually are much stronger in creating solutions, in sort of resisting crisis. I mean, that's something well established in the literature. But to what extent these practices, these forms of governance can be replicable, especially at government levels? Well, I have a serious question mark there, because, you know, the state machinery, you know, as the term itself suggests, you know, it's a machinery. I mean, it has a bureaucratic sort of structure. So, therefore, I mean, that's presumably why I have started my talk by sort of referring to the term commoning, simply because of the fact that it is there you will find cooperative structures. It is there you will find, you know, all kinds of solidaristic networks, you know, coming together and creating something. And presumably it is there where, you know, local people may come together, you know, young people, professors, you know, different sort of people with different hands may come together over a single issue, over a single team, and, you know, they can easily create their own solutions, which will be much more sort of sustainable than the one, you know, that has been imposed upon them. So, I mean, in the literature, we have cases after cases that these approaches have been more successful, and therefore I would suggest, you know, members of the government, members of international organizations, as well as the UN, that, you know, they should be welcoming more these types of initiatives. They have rather been sort of categorized as, well, okay, let's have them as well, but, you know, they are partial, they are there, and why not make them central? So that's the main sort of message that, you know, I have been trying to convey.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from the audience? Please, do you have a microphone? I don't know how this... Could we get a microphone to this side of the room, please?
Hi, everyone. My name is Timur Abdullayev. I'm a TB HIV activist, and I'm that idiot who raised the hand, believing in the fact that we will achieve SDGs by 2030. Was I really the only one raising my hand here? Okay, one more hand there. Awesome. What about the panel? My question to the panel, do you guys believe in it? I understand that I'm basically taking the conversation a bit to the different side, but do you believe in the fact that we can achieve SDGs by 2030?
I think the question... Sorry. I think it wasn't whether we can, it's whether we will, and that's a big difference. I think we can.
Okay, will we achieve SDGs by 2030? Sorry for putting the wrong question. If you agree, just raise your hand. Okay, so I think I'm in the wrong room, to be honest. We're here discussing how to make it happen, and if we don't believe we will make it happen, then it's definitely like either wrong people or the wrong way of spending the money. Seriously, I'm frustrated. Tomorrow I will be hijacking the floor. Right now I will just make a very short statement, but do you understand that if we don't believe that we will make it, we will never make it? I think if Elon Musk didn't believe in the fact that he can send a rocket to the space, he would never send a rocket to the space. I'm upset, seriously, and I'm really struggling not to use harder language. As an activist, I do that sometimes. But I think it really takes one little thing. Yes, I'm an idiot in many ways. I believe in God. I believe that we can end epidemics. I believe that we can fly to Mars. And I believe that we will achieve SDGs. But I think it's as simple as that. We just have to find a way to make it happen. And this is it. Do we lack resources? No, we don't. We do have the resources. It's just, it takes wisdom how to use them. And imagine, I mean, seriously, guys, you have one of the strongest corporations behind you. And like, who would believe that, right? Why do they care at all about things that are not money-making? But they do. And you prove it. And I'm sure there is thousands of stories here of things that nobody would believe, but they happened. So seriously, we just have to believe. I'm sorry to say that, but we have to believe. Otherwise, probably I should leave now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's specifically these types of discussions that we actually wanted to filter out, instead of assuming away certain directions and level of ambitions that we may need to have. So maybe from Indy onwards, reflections on the comment? Yeah.
I think it's a fair question, whether we believe. I think once we sort of get over the fact that we have no choice, then I think we get to the next real part of the question, which is what do we need to achieve, what do we need to do to achieve it? And I think that to me is the real question on the table, is what do we need to do? And I think that is where we go into the real question. How do you put together $2.5 trillion? That's the gap in funding. What does governance look like? What does accounting look like? What do the behaviors look like? These are the things that we're going to have to play with at a structural level. You're not going to do it in any other way. And I think that requires a whole directed focus into this pathway of change. And that means reframing this. So I think it's entirely doable. But the question is, are we allocating resource? Or are we just repeating the programs and strategies of the 20th century, late 20th century, in hoping to patch the problem? And that is, I think, a real challenge. So it's a fair question and a fair issue. But I think the real challenge then is, how do we deploy $5 billion US?
Yes, I think we have to face the realpolitik. Given imbalances in power, I think the very first step we need to do is have to democratize power. Unless we do that, we can't really start, asking the question. And I'm sure that we can positively answer the question whether we can achieve. Yes, we can achieve, but given the current asymmetries of power, it's rather difficult to believe that these targets will be achieved. So therefore, from my perspective, the very first task that we should be engaged in is how to make at a national, at a local, at a national, at a global level, how to democratize power, because currently power is distributed in a so unjust way that we are really I don't want to say hopeless, but I don't want to put pessimistic clothes onto you.
Thank you.
Actually, when we meet with young people, with students, and when we try, like the first thing that we did was how well known was the SDGs around the students, and it was really bad position. So we said that, okay, we need, how we gonna hit the target if nobody knows about the targets, right? So we started to communicate the Sustainable Development Goals, and we realized that this is not internalized by students. This is not their target. So this is basically another, most of the students, especially in the high school, they saw this as kind of like propaganda tool that, okay, there's this target, you need to hit that. It was more like a national propaganda than a development agency product, right? So after that, we tried to create a workshop, not focusing on creating awareness to the SDGs, but to create a complex problem-solving process. So now the students, they position the SDGs are like, they are happy about seeing a target that some organizations are thinking long-term to the 2030, and I think it's enough for them. Like they don't give that much thought about, are we going to hit them or not? They're focusing on, okay, there's this target, we are part of this global movement, but they know, they feel this is not their targets. They didn't develop them, right?
So we're going to show up to your panel tomorrow and crash. Thank you for that. Any other questions from the group? Going once. Yes, Professor Ben.
I'm sorry, I can't resist. Timur Aka, don't leave. We need you. There's a huge difference between believing that something will actually happen and treating something that's aspirational, that's worthy of striving for. And I think that's what the SDGs really are to most of us. I'm sorry, my name is Ben Slade. I work for UNDP. So we don't have to have the argument in terms of absolutes to believe it's a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you. No other questions? Yeah, one in the back. It'd be great to have a woman ask a question. There we go. Excellent. Yes, and Vesa. So, okay. I think microphone is coming to you guys.
Okay. Hi, I'm Envesa from Bosnia Country Office. I would just like to reflect how we frame a question when you asked whether we can achieve SDGs. I think everyone in this room thought, okay, given the structures we have at the moment, given the fact that we haven't organized ourselves how to achieve them, given that we don't have funding yet in place, probably everyone is thinking, well, maybe we cannot. So the true question is what actually Indy said is, what is the dream and what needs to change to achieve them? And I would just like to reflect, when we discuss $3 trillion needed every year, let's put it into a context of how much global income we produce every year, which is $94 trillion. So in comparison to $94 trillion, $3 trillion is not really that much. So just want to park that comment. And I really enjoyed this session. I think it's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. We had one more question in the back. No? Yes? Yes. Can we please get a microphone to the fourth row from the back?
Hello, my name is Sinan. I'm a PhD student from here, Istanbul Big University. So I'd like to ask Indy a question. I appreciate that you mentioned the importance of public policy and the state's capacity and the power to make some real changes. But considering that the states don't have the much economic power they used to have, and then with less space to conduct national economic policies, so how could you see an exit for states to come together and make some, macro policies such as you mentioned NHS, I believe, and some other things. Thank you.
Okay, I have a question from Twitter. This panel is giving me life. Thank you for asking the most difficult question of all, at Indi Johar. Are we ready to dream the institutions of the future? If so, what do we need to believe to make them a reality? And what do we need to do to achieve it? Who would like to answer that?
Maybe first question and then the Twitter question. No pressure.
No pressure. Okay. States, I know we say states don't have capital. States are one of the most concentrated form of capital there is. At least many of them are between 30 to 40, if not more, 50% of the GDP contribution of countries. So they have significant amounts of capital and the ability to raise capital. So I think one of the things we have to stop believing is the narrative of the disempowerment of state. I think this has been a constructed device design. So if I would recommend all of you read Mariana Mazzucato's Entrepreneurial State, which basically turns around and says 80% of the technologies in this are actually funded by DARPA. 80%. Not 5, not 10, 80% of this. So the state has a powerful mechanism to drive institution change, and it does. The problem is, I think we've psychologically reduced the state to having no agency. And that has been a journey we've been on for the last 20 to 30 years, or a tyrannical capacity. So I think there is dream capacity and power capacity in the state. I think there's a whole question about legitimacy in that story, which I think will come to the table. So I think first thing is really getting to grips on that. Second thing is there's going to be a whole bunch of accounting issues. So for example, if you start putting natural assets onto the balance sheet of states, they become very, very significant. And so an aquifer which provides free water, which is uncharged to a city, becomes a very powerful asset. So I think there's going to be, I wouldn't worry about the counting capacity of state. The money is not the problem. The problem is how we structure it and how we govern it and what the transformation looks like. And I think one of the big questions on the table is human development. So what does human development in the 21st century look like? What will schools, nurseries, and every educational infrastructure need to look like if you're going to unlock the full capacity of every citizen? Because in an age of automation, it's not going to be the industrial schools that we've got today. Every industrial nation, developing economy industrial nation, should be worrying about this. We're going to see a mass restructured reshoring of industries that were outsourced. What is that going to do to those developing economies? And unless they start to build human development infrastructure at the right scale and quantum, I don't think there's an economic future. So I don't think this is a choice where we don't have any money. States have always been able to raise money on the basis of what the value proposition is. And what is the value proposition? I think this is where we have to become much clearer about. And I think that will start to emerge. You're already seeing several Asia-Pacific nations starting to take this sort of approach seriously. And I think you're going to see one nation or two nations make that transformation. Why is universal basic income trials now happening in probably about 20 different countries around the world? Because states are recognizing this not just as a welfare solution, but as an economic solution. So I think we are at a progressive point in that story, and I'm more hopeful about that. Institutions of the future, I've kind of probably said quite a lot about, but maybe other people can chime in on. I don't want to. I've talked enough. I was suggesting other people could add in on the institutions of the future stuff.
Just, I would like to echo what you have just said, and perhaps, we should ask ourselves, why we are afraid of pronouncing the term neoliberalism. A term which is basically behind, all kinds of sins that, we have been talking about. And that's precisely the neoliberal ideology that has created a kind of a hegemony that we started thinking that states are, outside the economic realm, are powerless in providing, investments in environment or on social causes and so on and so forth. So perhaps we should start thinking once again, the kind of ideological trap we are living in, and we should not be afraid of questioning the kind of political, social, and economic realm that we are passing through. And well, with regard to institutions, well, perhaps as a way of reiterating my second concept, the degrowth issue. I mean, it's a kind of reorienting ourselves. So if you allow just me to say a few lines, there is a strong belief that with high growth rates we will sort out all kinds of problems that we have, social wise, ecological wise, political wise. It's a kind of miracle. So if you happen to have high growth rates, don't think over the list of problems, everything will get sorted out. No. No and no. And we should really start thinking over this fetishism or fascism that she mentioned, not I. Just for the record, we live in Turkey. So,
I do too.
Well, anyway, so I'm really hoping that we might have a different setting with much lower, economic activities. Because after all, I mean, at the end of the day, when you look at the relationship between happiness and growth, what do you see? I mean, the happiness index in Europe, keeps constant after 1955, roughly speaking, whereas, the economic prosperity increased enormously. So even that tiny sort of signal tells us a lot about our future institutions, about our future dreams. Thank you.
All right.
Okay. Are there any other questions or reflections? Yes.
Lilia, I just wanted to illustrate something. So, sorry, it was your point about the kind of ideological cul-de-sac. So, I mean, I'm using UK as an example because I've just studied it well. But, so for example, the NHS was born after the UK had come out of World War II, was effectively bankrupt at that moment in time, right? This was an economy that was basically broken after World War II and didn't receive all the aid that Germany did, but had to rebuild. That's when the NHS was born. The National Planning Act, which nationalised all planning rights in the UK, was exactly the same period. So large-scale so nationalised, you don't have a right to develop anything in the UK. You have a right to own the land. The development rights are collectively owned. That's the National Planning Act. This was an extraordinary achievement at the end of World War II, and they bought those rights. Those were bought for. They bought those rights. So I think we've just lost the ability to believe that the state can be an instrument of large-scale transformations. And that's largely because we've lost that. We've been, I think, I agree with you, we've been fed the line that actually the state should at best stay away from the market. And I think the state can create new markets. The state can create new possibilities. The state can create the conditions of new social value in a way that we've never believed before. And I think the time has come. So.
Thank you. Do we have one more question? This is the last question.
It's a closing comment, maybe.
Closing comment, sure. You do my job. I love it. Go ahead.
Well, just maybe to follow up on the conversation about why not. What are the obstacles that we have in front of us and which may prevent us from achieving SDGs and doing all the beautiful stuff which is written there as targets. Just one example that a friend of mine is using all the time when describing why everything is possible. And he says, like, imagine your child or your mother or your loved one is sick, like really sick. And you need to buy a medicine, and you know where that medicine is. So you go to the pharmacy and the medicine is not there. And they tell you, come tomorrow, come in a week, we don't have it. Will you stop there? No, you will not. You will go to the other pharmacy. Even if it's midnight, even if it's, I don't know, if it's Christmas or whatever, nothing works. You will not stop until you find that bloody medicine. So if we will not stop when doing something that matters to us, why should we stop in other things that we think need to be done? So yes, governments, they may be fantastic, they may be awful, they may not be helpful, and same applies actually to other partners. I heard a lot of bad stuff about private sector, but also I know a lot of awesome stuff about private sector. And I know that some governments are actually doing amazing things, so it's possible. We just don't need to stop. And we just have to be pushing and pushing and pushing no matter what. No matter what political reality we live in, no matter what economic reality we live in, we know that the money is out there somewhere, we just need to find it and use it. And yes, it's easy for me to say I'm an activist, ha ha ha, but the thing is, if all of us are activists in this way, nothing will stop us, seriously, and we're not doing something controversial. We're actually, SDGs are amazing, right? So why should we stop? Why should we be, restrain ourselves? We should go for that medicine no matter what. Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you very much. I can't do the justice in terms of summarizing all of the points discussed other than to say that there seems to be a fundamental misalignment between the way governments are structured and the type of challenges encapsulated in SDGs. It isn't an issue of power, but whether it's democratized. It isn't an issue about finance, but where is it allocated to? It isn't an issue of expertise, but where does it sit and how is it recombined? So what this all points to is building politics of change, and that can be ticked off. That's not a taxonomy. That's a lot fuzzier and far more difficult than being able to reduce it to a set of indicators. And I think this is where one of the biggest issues that we're looking at when we think of SDGs is. So without any further ado, thank you so much for your attention and for the patience and for the questions. Guys, thank you so much for your insights and expertise. This was a lot of fun. If I can ask you for a big round of applause for them, please.
And could you tell us your name, please, activist? What, your name? Mike, please, sorry.
I'm usually I'm an activist.
And I just want to thank you for speaking up so much.
I will be speaking tomorrow. I will be hijacking the floor for like 10 minutes.
We look forward, that's what it's here, a dialogue. We look forward to it. What's your name?
Yeah, it's Timur Abdullayev, activist. I feel like I'm at Alcoholics Anonymous. And, yeah.
Timur, and I'm sure you all want to give you another round of applause. Thank you so much for your sincerity today. And this panel, excellent, really excellent. Thank you so much, Millie. Thank you, all of you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Wow. I think that's the word that just summarizes this panel up. What a great lineup of speakers. And this makes a perfect transition to the next panel that we have, which is talking about how are we going to pay for the SDGs? Where are these $2.5 trillion a year that we've been talking about going to come from? And I hope we also do tackle the word belief, which has been at the core of what we've just been talking about now. And towards the end, I want to tell you about belief in projects, especially my experience working with electric cars with the new Formula One. I'll come to that at the end of the session. But yes, now the next panel, we're going to talk about who is going to pay for all these global goals. And it's time to hear for the people that turn billions into trillions. We have 3 of them here, absolutely, in making the money sign. But first I'd like to introduce our moderator, Samantha Attridge, Senior Research Fellow at the Overseas Development Institute from London. Thank you so much for coming to Istanbul. Thank you, pleasure. Take a seat.
I think we've got 5 on the panel, so
oh, okay. It's grown. See, the billions are turning into trillions as we speak. I'll introduce the ones that I have, and if there's any missing, we'll introduce them then. Gail Clinsworth, Business Transformation Director from Business Sustainable Development Commission in the UK. Welcome. Hi, welcome. Take a seat. Thank you. Josh Verbeek, Special Representative to the UN and the WTO from the World Bank Group. He was making the money sign, so I'm sure you have a lot to say.
Hope so.
Thank you. Welcome. Matteo Rivellini, who I've been sitting next to throughout the day. Welcome. He is the EIB Head of Division Public Sector Operation covering Slovenia, Croatia and the Western Balkans. Nice to see you. And Lucia Atenossi, Senior Economist from the Council of Europe Development Bank. Hello, Lucia. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're all set. Excellent. And after this is the coffee break, so do stay put.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the exciting part of the afternoon. I don't know if we can follow that session to talk about financing and shifting the needle from billions to trillions. I think we've all heard that expression a lot in the last few years. So today we're going to talk about where's the money going to come from, how are we going to fund this? And specifically for this panel, we're going to look and talk about the role of the international financial institutions. So it's specifically focused on the role in shifting that needle. I'd say this morning, actually, I think Marcus did quite a nice scene setting. He told us about the vast financing needs we had. He quoted 1.9 billion to 3.1 billion per annum, estimated by UNCTAD. He also outlined the economic opportunity presented by the SDGs for the private sector of about $12 trillion. And that money wasn't the problem. But actually, I'm not sure if it is the problem, but what we do know is that the money isn't flowing. And one figure that wasn't quoted, for example, was institutional investors currently sit on almost $10 trillion worth of assets that are negative yielding assets. And so there's a little bit of a mismatch in the global finance system between the supply of finance and where it's invested and allocated. So, as I say, the question I think that we're facing, and I want to ask this panel, is how do we incentivize and reorientate these investment flows into investment into sustainable development? It can't be business as usual. We've heard that a lot today, and that fundamental change is required. It's a collective effort. It's not the public sector and then the private sector. It's a collective effort. So it's both public and private, but it's also that the national level, that the systems, it's the international level and it's the regional level. So it's a holistic collective effort that we need, and I believe that there's fundamental change that is required, and we're going to probe that this afternoon with the institutions represented on the panel. We also heard earlier about a paradigm shift. As we saw with the MDDs to the SDGs, we see one in finance. And what do I mean by that? What we've seen now is a movement away from, if you like, the aid effectiveness agenda and aid, really to one which is focused on how do we crowd in additional private finance using public resource and public policy, and also an emphasis on domestic revenue mobilisation, and we spoke this morning about that. So what we want to know is, what's the role of the IFIs in this? And I think about 3 years ago, the IFIs, I think we have one of the architects of the strategy here, articulated their contribution to this shifting the needle from billions to trillions. And I think there were 3 areas where the MDB system could be focusing on, and it's identified. That's around leveraging its resource. It's around technical assistance and policy guidance, and importantly around improved coordination and alignment across the system. So anyway, enough from me. I'm delighted to have this wonderful panel, and we've got a really good panel today with great expertise and different perspectives, I think. So I'm hoping to probe them. They've already said I can probe them and ask them some difficult questions, and I'm asking the audience as well if anything feel free to put them on the spot and ask difficult questions as well. So I have two representatives from the multilateral development banks. We have Jos Verbeek, as already introduced, from the World Bank Group, and Matteo Revellini from the EIB. And they're important because they'll be able to talk to us about this billions to trillions strategy of the MDB system. And then in the same breath as we talk about private finance, often blended finance comes out. And I'm delighted that we have Gail on the panel, who was involved in the Sustainable Business Development Commission, who issued a really, really interesting report on scaling up blended finance in January, which is going to be finalised and launched at the spring meetings. And it raises some really interesting observations and questions about the MDB system, which we can discuss with our colleagues. And then finally, we have Lucia, who works for the Council of Europe Development Bank, which is quite a unique institution which focuses exclusively on social investment. And I think this is quite interesting because when we talk about private finance and blended finance in particular, we see that it's heavily concentrated in the hard sectors of the economy. And so I think it'd be really interesting to get your perspective about how do we go about also incentivising private investment in the more social sectors. So without further ado, we're going to have 3 rounds of questions with the panel. And the first set of questions I'd like to ask, and maybe I'll start with you, Lucia, is basically with this billions to trillions agenda, if you like, which started around 2015 with the adoption of the 2030 agenda, what top 2 kind of changes do you see have been made in terms of shifting this needle, or what's been put in place, the foundations?
Okay, one thing I should say before I start, that we did not actually sign the from billions to trillions strategy, but it doesn't mean that we do not care. On the contrary, we do care a lot. In fact, our institution has a social mandate, and we have therefore been paying close attention to the global agenda. And especially since last year, when we started working on how we, as a small institution acting in Europe in social investment, could assess our own contribution to SDGs. I will therefore address your question from our own perspective. At the CEB, the Council of Europe Development Bank, we have introduced 2 major changes. The first is strategic. We have updated our strategy to include climate action as one of our top priorities, along with our social mandate. 5 years ago, our shareholders were reluctant for us to focus on climate change because our job was to concentrate on our social mandate. But obviously with time, we have realized that the 2 aspects cannot and must not be separated. So today, we have a sectoral line of action dedicated to developing mitigation and adaptation measures in the context of climate change. And we do carry out environmental screening and impact assessment on all our social projects. The second change has been in terms of innovation in our financial instruments. Last year, we issued our first social inclusion bond. The proceeds from this bond finance projects with high social quality in the sectors of social housing, education, and job creation in micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. And there has been very strong interest from the market in this instrument, and especially from a wide range of socially responsible investors. And we are very pleased about this because our idea is to create momentum in this segment and to bring the market around to our objective, which is to enhance social cohesion in Europe. And 2 weeks ago, we issued our second social inclusion bond. It was the same volume of 500 million euros. And the deal again attracted a lot of interest of high quality investors. And if I am talking about this instrument, because this particular instrument is directly close to several SDGs.
Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Just for the ones who don't know the European Investment Bank, the EIB is the bank of the European Union member states that primarily invest in Europe, however also in other 130 countries in the world. The EIB finances infrastructure, innovation, climate adaptation projects, as well as SMEs. And just to give you an order of magnitude of what we do and how we contribute to these sustainable development goals, in 2017 only we financed 80 billion projects. To bear in mind that when we say 80 billion, because we are additional, we are a crowding in bank, we're additional to the market, that has meant that the investments in total that were carried out thanks to our investment amounted to 250 billion euro only in 2017. 10% of this amount was devoted to projects located outside Europe. And this is one of the ways we contribute to the billion to trillion strategies, one of the ways we contribute to the Agenda 2030, to which our shareholders have committed and to which the European Commission is also committed. We also measure the impact of what we are doing. Just to give you an example about, again, 2017 figures, we have the estimate of the impact of our investments in SMEs, for example, will produce something like 530,000 jobs. Our investments in the health sector will produce the fact that 130,000 people will be treated in new hospitals following the realization of the projects. All this to say that we are contributing massively to these needs, these financial needs that are needed for the objective to attaining the objective in 2030. However, I want to use the opportunity here for having a number of representatives of public administration to say that yes, the investment needs the investment gap is huge, the resources are possibly there, the financial resources are possibly there. However, we all need to think about how to use better the financial resources that we have already. When we have the issue of the scarcity of energy sources, we develop the concept of energy efficiency. Here, we have a scarcity of financial resources. We need to develop a concept of finance efficiency. And when I say finance efficiency, I really mean that we need to make sure, and the burden is particularly on the public administrations, we need to make sure that when we're talking about infrastructures to be financed, are financed well and monies are well spent. I'm going to give you, just to finish my first intervention, a few examples on how monies can be spent very badly. And these are all transport infrastructure, transport projects that occurred in the Balkans. And I will not name them, but the region I know best. So when a public administration has a scarcity of resource, it needs to make sure that the project is well chosen, number one. When I say well chosen, it means that if the all international financial institutions are telling you that this project is not economically viable, then you should drop it. This is not happening all the time. You need to make sure that it's well prepared. When it is about a road that goes cross-border, before you start constructing it, you need to make sure that the alignment is agreed with the other country, because you need to have to make another bypass to connect the two roads from the two countries. You need to make sure that number three is well procured. You do not need to accept an unreasonably low bidding offer, because it might happen that because of variation order, you might end up in paying twice the amount of the projected cost. You need to make sure that number 4 is well constructed, particularly when there is a subcontracting entities working for it. If there is a project that say the bill of quantities, there is a number of, quantity of cement that needs to be used, also the subcontractors need to be committed to this type of engagement. And number 5, you need to make sure that the infrastructure is well maintained. If you see that the motorway company budget is fully devoted to the salaries of the headquarters and there are no tolls that are given to the maintenance cost, to the expenditure for the capital, for the maintenance cost, you have a problem in maintaining for long term the asset. So just to conclude this first intervention, more than thinking, or in addition to thinking of additional resources, let's use better the available resources.
Thank you. Not to prolong your intervention any further, are the top 2 changes that the EIB have made in light of this agenda, new agenda?
Well, this is like certainly one of the areas where we are looking at with particular attention. We have turned down all these 5 projects I mentioned when we were requested to finance. With all the disappointment of the public authorities, we've turned them down. But there is more than this. There is a problem of empowerment of public administration. There is a problem of increasing of the regulatory framework in the countries. There is a problem, in one word, I'll come back to this, of the strengthening the rule of law in these countries.
Thank you very much. And Jos, from the World Bank's perspective?
Well, I can honestly say that I'm not personally responsible for the title from billions to trillions, but my institution certainly is. Internally, we had a sort of a discussion about should we call it billions for trillions or should we call it billions to trillions. And I can tell you I was in the camp who said billions for trillions, because I felt that if you look at the financing going around in development, you look at ODA, it's about $140, $145 billion a year. Our own institution, consisting out of IDA, IBRD and IFC and MIGA, the last one is our guaranteeing agency, we do about $65 billion a year. And then of course there's some double counting because some of IDA resources also count as ODA. So if you look at the billions to trillions, because I lost out in the title race at the time, but of course, if you look at what the MDBs actually have to do, is that the MDBs actually, in particular also my institution, the World Bank, we have to move from a resource transfer type of mentality to a resource mobilization type of mentality. We cannot just do any more business as usual and do $65 billion a year without thinking, how are we mobilizing private financial resources? Yeah? So I think that the paradigm shift that we have to have in the MDBs, and which is actually going on, and I will give you maybe 2 examples from what we're doing in the World Bank, is that in a sense we have to start thinking about how do we get the private sector not just interested in creating jobs and growth and things like that, but how do we get particularly the private financial sector interested in financing development. Now, in the bank we put 2 mechanisms together. One is what we call the so-called cascade. And what does the cascade mean for us? It means that when we are seeing a project in a country, and it's a priority project that the government and the bank have identified as an important project that needs to be financed and should be implemented, the first question we are supposed to ask, can this be financed by the private sector, or do we need to use scarce public international financial resources from the World Bank for it? If the answer is no, then we need to, in a sense, help the government to mobilize these private sector resources. If the answer initially is no, it's not possible to do this with private resources just the way it currently stands, this project, then we really have to think about, can we do things through regulation or creating markets such that the private sector is actually interested in participating, financing, or fully financing this project. If that's the case, then we are being asked within our institution to work with government officials to put these markets and regulations in place so that actually the private sector can participate in financing of these projects. You could, for example, think about that land ownership is not possible for a private sector in a certain countries. How do you then arrange that you put a road in place by which potentially you want that road ownership still to be with the private sector? How are you going to arrange regulations and create a market that land can be treated as if it's owned by the private sector who's building the road on it? Yeah? And then, of course, also we have to ask ourselves, is the private sector not coming into your country to finance this particular project because it's too risky? What type of risks are out there? Is it a financial risk? Is it a political risk? And how are we actually then going to de-risk that project? Do we just need to put in place political insurance? Then we have MIGA. Can we do that through some type of first loss perspective principles or through blended finance? If that's the case, then again, we are going in and we maybe put some of our financial resources there, but most of it we will still try to get from the private sector. And then lastly, if it's indeed, it is a priority for the government, but again, the private sector said no, even with de-risking or with changing in regulations, we are not going to finance this project, then we can have a discussion with the government and say, yes, let's use World Bank resources or other MDB resources to finance this particular project. So that's a mentality change and a change in incentives within the World Bank group on how we are approaching countries. Now, obviously, this is often a bit more successful, it will be maybe more successful initially in middle-income countries, but doesn't stop us from thinking about energy projects or road projects or bridge or port projects or airport projects in low-income setting as well to bring the private sector there. Because if we are bringing the private sector there, we have these other low resources from IDA, for example, to do other projects in a country. If we are using... So the whole issue is, how are we going to crowd in, or are we crowding out the private sector? So the question and the mentality shift that we want to accomplish within the World Bank is that we are really going to crowd in private sector instead of crowding out private sector, because infrastructure projects are the easy ones to do. Now, another one is in the billions to trillions paper, if I might still call it like that, although I like to call it billions for trillions. There was also a lot of discussion about how are we going to deal with global public goods or global public bets. Yeah. These are the issues around pandemics, these are the issues around climate change, these are the issues around famine. And there also what we said is, okay, we need maybe to look at this much more from an insurance perspective. Why don't we try to develop an insurance market for pandemics? Why don't we try to develop an insurance market for famine? Why don't we sit down with the private insurers? And we did for pandemic, we did already, and we worked with Swiss reinsurance, Munich reinsurance. And basically the great thing there also is that the private sector comes in, they look at how we normally approach these type of projects, and they put a lot of discipline on top of us, because the private sector, the insurance company, will not write a contract with us on pandemics like Ebola or on famine if there is not a decent return to be made and if it's not viable within the long term. So these are two of the examples I would like to bring. A is the cascade, that's really at the country level. Every country we are being asked to look at, is there a possibility to bring the private sector in? And the second one is really about global public goods, to work also much more with the private sector, particularly in these global public bets, to bring in insurance companies to help us model and to ensure that in the end we have resources available for countries that get hit by pandemics and famine. Thank you.
Thank you. And Gail, if you would like to provide your perspective, I think you're coming probably from a private sector perspective, perhaps.
Yeah, hi. So first of all, hi everyone. I walked in the back here and I thought, gee, I wonder where I am. It felt like a kind of energy sapping room. So if I could just for a moment ask you all to stretch, it would be good. Thank you. You know, I was thinking, I'm going to come to it right now, but I was thinking, I work quite a lot with young entrepreneurs all around the world who are trying to come up with great solutions for the SDGs. And I was thinking, I would have loved them to be here trying to answer these questions, because you know, we should adopt some of that, I think, in our way of being. So enough of that to try and get some energy going. So what is my view on where's the money and what's happening? So first of all, I guess, you know, there are $220 trillion of funds under management in the world. Huge amount of money out there. It's not our money, as one of my colleagues said to me, it's actually our money. So Pension funds have 17% of it, insurance companies 9% of it, banks 38% of it, private equity 1% of it, asset wealth managers 31.5% of it, and sovereign wealth funds 3.5% of it. Lots and lots of money. I guess the real question is, how is it being used, and who's telling all of these people how to use it? So my background, I was with Unilever for my whole life almost. I ran Unilever in Africa, and then the global savory business, global laundry business. I was chief sustainability officer. I then went to Old Mutual, which is a financial services business, to try and understand how money moves. But all the way through, my belief was that business needs to serve society, because only businesses that serve society actually have a role to play. And that was why I did what I did, and why I do what I do now, which is trying to make the case around a proper economic case around the reason why the SDGs are so important. So we've got 220 trillion. How do we get that flowing behind the SDGs? Well, the good thing, one of my little projects at the moment has been looking at this idea of blended finance. And I'm going to hold up this little report. You guys can go online and find it. But all it does is really try and understand what's happening. And I'm going to use an example I used at lunchtime today, which is, it feels like instead of us all playing a relay race to win at the end of the day, we're all playing different games. So the international finance institutions, the MDBs, the national governments, the private sector, the pension, are all playing different games. If we could at least align some of that around achieving what it is we need to achieve for the SDGs, suddenly we have a whole rush of possibility. And so this little report, all it does is try to speak about, and I was delighted to meet, yes, I haven't met you before, but delighted to hear about the cascade approach and the idea of mobilizing capital, private capital. Because quite simply, there's a problem. The problem is that pension funds, and most of us, I think, have our pensions in a pension fund. And I'd ask you, where is your money going? Do you know? Right? Pension funds can't just put their money wherever they fancy it to go, because they have to look after your future and my future. And so they are risk averse. They try to go to places where they are sure that they're going to be safeguarded and they're going to be flows at least for 20 or 30 years in the future. Insurance companies, I've been involved in insurance too. Insurance companies have exactly the same issue. They have to underwrite based on the risks that they can understand. And then if you have a look at banks, and I'm not going to talk about, the greedy bankers, I'm going to talk about banks that are safeguarding our money. Similarly, banks have to underwrite projects where they can understand the risk and they can understand the returns. So where we are all in, I guess I'd call it the world that cares about the SDGs, thinking about how we crowd in finance, we really need to start thinking in financial terms. How do we stop thinking about the finance guys as the bad guys and the development guys as the good guys, but start thinking about how together we can run a relay race to be able to solve the problem. I can add one last thing. I want to talk about the importance of women very quickly, right? Because everywhere I go, I try and understand how many women leaders are driving for the changes we need. And similarly to the blended finance report, we've also published a report on the importance of women leaders leading for the global goals, simply because we know that, and I'll reel off some statistics at some point if anyone's interested, but we know that when more women are leading to make the decisions that need to be made, very often there's a broader consideration set that comes in. And so talking about the levers for the SDGs, innovation is one, finance flowing the right way is another, and we believe that more gender-balanced leadership is another one. I'm done.
Thank you very much. So keeping with the relay theme, I'm going to turn to Joss. So Gail, you mentioned around the 200 million, which is under management, and I mentioned earlier about the 200 trillion, assets under management of our institutional investors, and then the investment in the negative yielding assets. So this is where I'm going to come to Joss and to the EIB, Matteo. What's the role of the IFIs then? How can the IFIs help in tapping this institutional investments? What's your role? How can you help us tap this? And so I put that question to you, Joss.
Well, one thing I think I said already, that's this whole cascade approach, by asking yourself all the time together with government officials who are supposedly borrowing from us, if it's really worthwhile to take the money from us, or if they care better off taking the money from the private sector, because the money then that comes from us can be used for sectors and purposes that currently no private sector really wants to go. And that's still often in social sectors like health, education, or social transfers. So that's one thing. I think the second thing is really our institution is basically our business model is preparing and implementing projects. So I think what we have to do, and even more than in the past, is really helping countries, developing countries, our client countries, to help prepare projects in such a way that actually they can be provided or shown to the private sector and get their interest to finance them and implement. So I think that's and then, of course, also, I think, related to that, is that we need to really help governments also to see what are the risks of engaging with the private sector. We should not think that this is like, the holy grail to getting better development outcomes. There are many stories out there by which public-private partnership didn't do very well or didn't go very well. And I think the risk sharing within these public-private partnerships, because that's in a sense what you do when you bring the private sector in to help you finance development. We need to understand very well, and I think government officials need to understand very well, and the private investor who comes in needs to understand it very well, is who carries the risks and for what. Because we have gone through a debt crisis, and it was really not a pleasant one in the mid-90s on the developing countries, and we really don't want to end there again. So we need to go in with our eyes wide open and not eyes wide shut. We need to be open that A, we prepare proper projects and we help the countries prepare projects, and B, we help them really evaluate what type of contracts they get into when they sign this type of public-private partnerships.
So do you see any role in terms of leverage then and financial instruments? I mean, you've spoken around, if you like, the enabling environment and the preparation side of things. How about, utilising the balance sheets and the kind of blended finance? So instruments.
No, exactly, absolutely. But that's in a sense, for me, is very much the cascade approach. And I have some other ideas on innovative financing that we might talk about a bit later. But I think the cascade approach is really the first thing to leverage our balance sheet, and is to leverage the resources from the private sector to the government.
Okay, so we might hear a bit more. Matteo, would you like to comment on this?
No, just to say that what Gail said is really, at the core of how we can, as IFIs, we can help in becoming a conduit of, transferring this huge amount of money that is under management and often with negative interest in the current financial environment, and bring it towards the usage for SDGs. Financial sector or capital markets is a very simple word. They want to have, the major principle are, credibility, reliability of the partners. When you are in a reinsurance company, when you are a wealth fund, you indeed want to have a long-term investment where to put your money, but you want to be sure that you don't lose your money. You want to be sure that on the other side there is someone that goes for some investments that are safe, that are sound enough not to go bankrupt. And here the role of the IB, the role of other IFIs is crucial, because every year the IB goes into the capital markets to ask for around 80 billion to the institutional investors around the world, and to do so we need to maintain our capital very well balanced, very well managed. We need to maintain our AAA rating, because otherwise we will not get this money. And this is where we can become a conduit, because this is the way we can tap these funds and to use them for sound projects. Sound projects, as you said, is another key role for us, for IFIs. We need to make sure that the projects, as I said before, are well prepared, well maintained, and so on and so forth. And when we do so, we also have the opportunity to bring in other private sector investments. We've seen, for example, or in the Western Balkans, but not only, that whenever we enter, even with a small stake into a project, this is considered to be a label of good quality from banks or other long-term investors to put their own money into the same project. So if you like, on one side, we're getting this money from the, let's say, asset management world into the SDG project. On the other side, we make sure that when we finance a project, there are other investors that join the investments.
Thank you for that. Coming back to you, Gail, then. So referring to the report that was issued and is going to be launched at the spring meetings, what does the Business Commission think that the IFIs need to do differently? What are your key recommendations? And then perhaps so we can have some responses to that.
Okay, so there were 6 recommendations, which I'm not going to cover in detail. I guess the most important point for the IFIs is, I guess, the relay race. Okay, understanding that each of us has a role to play in driving things forward. So, if you are an asset or wealth manager that is sitting on 32% of the 200 trillion, you need to speak to your wealth managers, and trust me, I've been in the wealth management, it's not that easy. Right? You need to speak to them and help them to understand the opportunity that's out there, that they shouldn't really only look at an S&P 500, have a look at what's out there that's possible, go after the easy pickings. They need to really have a look at what they should put in their mandate that could be new growth opportunities that are linked to the SDGs. If you look at the MDBs, we've been speaking about mobilization ratios, and I'm not going to mention what the numbers are because they all seem to be all over the place. But, is mobilization ratio a critical incentive for what the MDBs are actually trying to deliver on the ground? I know that when you speak to some of the private sector, they will say, we actually can't find bankable projects because MDBs on the ground are incentivized to deliver projects, and so they basically bundle them up, take them themselves, and then there's nothing left for the private sector. So there's something about mobilization ratios. And then for pension funds, I actually think they're moving quite fast. So pension funds are moving quite fast in terms of removing the most negative elements in terms of future deliverables from their portfolios. Haven't yet found a way to talk about how you should bring in riskier SDG-linked investments. And I think that's what we all have to help them to do. And then there's something around projects. Right, so I don't know if we'll have time to talk about this, but I particularly wanted to mention the Turkish hospital bond that I think is one of the case studies we raise in the report, because it's an example of a blended finance vehicle that really delivered something quite special, with ERBD providing the liquidity facility, the World Bank providing the political risk insurance, Moody's then being able to give a much higher rating, so what we call piercing the sovereign ceiling, and suddenly you had a project that was highly investable and everyone interested in it. I'm personally working right now on something around special economic zones, one in Nigeria, one in Mozambique, maybe one in Trieste, which I need to talk to my friend Matteo about. So the idea of finding projects that are really interesting, because they'll move forward the SDG agenda, but they're going to need different financing solutions. So how can we get the players in the relay race together to think about them? So I think that's what the Blended Finance Report says. Everyone figure out what your role is in the relay and play it.
Great, thank you very much. Just quickly, just in the spirit of the conversation, I mean, Jos and Matteo, do you have any reflection on that in terms of the mobilisation kind of ratios and changes to business models and incentives, which perhaps that's pointing to? Just some very brief kind of reactions to that, please.
Well, just I let the numbers speak for a couple of initiatives that we have carried out. One you may be aware of, when the President of the Commission, European Commission, Juncker, started his office, he said we need to have by 2018 315 billion new investments being carried out in Europe. This was his stimulus, if you like, from a political side during his commission. And how we're going to do it? He said we're going to give the European Investment Bank 16 billion of euro of the taxpayers' money. What we've done, we've taken this 16 billion euro, we have added another 5 billion euro to it, and we have put together a first loss piece, a guarantee for our investment that amounted to 21 billion euro. And because of this guarantee, we actually could step up our investments because our balance sheet was covered enough by this guarantee, so our AAA was not put at stake, and we have managed to develop an investment plan that at the end of 2017 contributed for 257 billion euro of investments carried out. The beauty of it, however, is that the EIB money into this 250 billion euro, or more than this, was only 51. So all the rest came from the private sector, because what we did with this guarantee, we actually undertook the riskier part of the investment, and we let the senior investor looking for safer type of investments take the most comfortable part of the investment.
Okay, thank you. Jos?
Yeah, very quickly. I think you call about a relay race, or you talk about the cascade. I think it's converging. Yeah, it's where do we find the role for one another, and I think we will probably have to have some more discussions with, particularly I think with the long-term private investors like pension funds and insurance companies, to see how do we better connect with them to bring them on board and deal with them. The thing about issues around mobilization, or in my institution, when I was myself what we call task team leader, the most wonderful thing and most thing you looked up to was going to the board with your project. Yeah? And you would get a reward, basically, or a promotion, or something. This was really important if you go to the board. I think that mentality also is in the bank, has to change. You can only, in a sense, be really rewarded going with a project to the board if you mobilize private resources. Yeah? It's simple as that. I mean, these type of reward systems are changing, and I think, I don't want to use, the cascade is not an answer to everything, because it isn't, but it certainly helps to drive through mentality change and incentives within the organization to align ourselves much better with what resources are out there from the private sector and try to bring them to development.
Great, thank you. Coming to you, Matteo, now, because just reflecting on your portfolio, which you look after in the Balkans, if you could talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you're facing in terms of financing infrastructure investment projects in your region.
Just again to give an idea about the activity of the EIB in the Western Balkans, in the 6 Western Balkan countries. Over the last 10 years, we have lent about 7 billion euro. Recently, in the aftermath of the refugee crisis that hit the Western Balkan route, we were asked to step up our efforts through the so-called Economic Resilience Initiative, which will allow us to do more private sector funding and leveraging. We financed infrastructure. Our portfolio is composed of infrastructure projects, particularly in the transport sector, but also in energy and social sectors, as well as SMEs through commercial banks or national promotional banks. I think if I have to point at one challenge is, let me go back to what I mentioned earlier, is or the most urgent priority is rule of law. I think I was discussing with a colleague earlier from UNDP. This time around, given the enlargement strategy that was adopted by the Commission in February this year for the Western Balkans, is either now or never to take the to seize the opportunity to change things and to make public administration more efficient and more effective, and to have a rule of law strengthened in these countries. Rule of law is a big principle, but you need to spell it out in various very simple things, such as a decrease of political influence over the technical decisions on investments, an increase of professionalism in public administration, an increase of empowerment of the local institutions and capacity of local institutions. Let me conclude with one example of which we are very proud at the bank. The public procurement laws in each and every one of the 6 Western Balkan countries says then that when there is an investment project that is financed by an IFI, the procurement complaints need to be tackled by the international financial institution that is financing the project. In other words, you are bidding for constructing a motorway. You are not happy with the transparency of the process of the procurement, you complain, you are not allowed to go to Serbian first instance authority to complain about, you need to go to World Bank, you need to go to EBRD or whatever. We said that this is no more the case. We went to the parliament together with the Serbian authorities, to the Serbian parliament, and from now on, all our 17 active operations, whatever complaint is happening on projects financed by the EIB, is to be dealt by the Republic Commission, the Serbian Republic Commission on Procurement. This is the way to empower further the local authorities. This is a way to make sure that increased professionalism is happening in the country, and even IFIs, multilateral, are stepping back from helping them on each and every inch of their processes.
Okay, thank you. As I say, we're talking quite a lot about kind of the assets under management and redirecting and incentivizing different investment flows. But I think quite often we're talking around the hard sectors of the economy and things. So, but what do we think about private finance and, if you like, the social sectors? And I know that you focus on this and your institution focuses exclusively on this. So do you have any reflections kind of on this issue around private finance and social impact investment? Thanks.
I have, and I'm sorry if I will repeat some of the challenges already mentioned by my colleagues here. What we see at the CEB, that there is a gap, a large gap in Europe between the needs for social infrastructure investments and the money actually mobilized for that purpose. And this gap has even widened since the financial crisis. For example, I can give you one figure. In the EU, we estimate the gap to be 150 billion per year. This means a total gap of 1.5 trillion for social infrastructure investment over the period 2018-2030. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I want to focus on some of the important things. So I want to focus on the financing side of social infrastructure. We are talking about small and mainly public investments. Small compared to major economic infrastructure. We were talking about toll roads, airports. Public investment, because responsibility for social infrastructure investment mainly lies with local and regional authorities in Europe. We are also talking about investment which is often financially unattractive to long-term investors because the impact, the economic and social, mainly social impact, is difficult to assess over the long-term horizon. But this doesn't mean that we cannot attract private finance. Having said that, what we need in Europe is to boost both public and private investment. Let me see. And to achieve this, we need major changes and new initiatives to increase the size of investment and to implement innovation in this investment. First of all, Matteo already mentioned, we need to increase the pipeline of good, technically and financially viable projects for social infrastructure. And here, in this respect, we need to build capacity at national and local level. Second, we need to promote new financial instruments specifically dedicated to social infrastructure, such as social bonds. I already mentioned our social inclusion bond. And third, I'm repeating what my colleague said, we need a stable or more investment-friendly regulatory environment with, for example, favorable taxation and incentive schemes for social investment.
Okay, thank you. I think we started late, so I wonder if, can I go to the floor and open up?
One or two questions very quickly.
Because I think we started slightly late, so... Okay, so I'm going to open the floor up, so if we have any questions, please pop your head up if there's anything coming in online. No?
None at all, and we have none from Twitter either at the moment.
Okay, right. Well, maybe can I just then finish the session just by quickly...
Absolutely.
Just by asking the panel, just quickly, maybe to Gail and Lucia, what do you think then are the two kind of just, I don't know, very, very quickly, the two top changes that are needed and the actions required?
I can answer this question on two different levels. At institutional level, as the CEB, the top two changes we need to make concern first how we can mainstream SDGs in all our activities. And the second one is how we can then measure our contribution to SDGs. And the second level is the global level, and this is why we are all here together today, is how we can work together, how we can collaborate, develop our partnerships with which we can work.
Thank you. Gail?
I guess the first thing would be to have these conversations more frequently, but in the light of very particular projects or challenges. Something that really concerns me, which is why I guess I made that flippant remark in the beginning, is that many of the people that are trying to solve these things are so far removed from where the real issues are that we actually are trying to set policies and without any concept of what's going on the ground. And so I'm a great believer in moving forward by solving a problem. And so for us, you know, whoever it might be and whoever you might be, to think about what it is you want to solve and what you need finance to do about it. And then pull the right people together and try and solve it, I think is quite frankly far more useful than sitting in more conferences. That's my personal point of view. That's the first point. And the second would be, I guess quite simply, get more women in leadership.
I second that. And then over to Yossa Mathieu. What do you think are the most promising financial tools to close or to crowd in this investment? Just very short, what do you think what should the IFIs be looking into?
No, just to do more with less. I mean, this is we're not making miracles, although bankers sometimes they try. But the example I made with the Juncker plan is replicated with the external lending mandate we have, another guarantee whereby for €1 of the taxpayer money in DIB there is €25 of investment. Again, there is no miracle behind. There is simple statistical calculation of the risk over a portfolio for which a guarantee is provided by taxpayers' money, and this allows the bank to invest more towards the objective of the attainment of the SDGs.
We do have one from Twitter. How can we move beyond narrow investment in women's empowerment for gender equality? And I guess, Gail, I think only you can kick this one off, if I may say so.
Should we just let us kind of just introduce to the instruments and then we'll answer the gender?
Oh, you were still on the other one.
Financial instruments first? Yeah, okay. I think, of course, I can comment on the gender one as well. I think in our institution it's very clear.
You have to.
Gender equality is good economics, period. I mean, and more women in leadership is a clear commitment that our senior management is following through. So that's certainly happening. I think of our CEOs, we have 4 CEOs in our organization, or 5, because we have these 5 bodies. 3 of them are female. Yeah? So I think on that front we're trying to walk the talk as much as we can. On financial, I think there's a realization in the World Bank and probably else as well, is that the cascade is the cascade approach that I've been trying to explain to you is a very transaction-intensive type of approach. And actually that maybe it's good to bring local investors, financial investors around the table and get them interested in financing development. But that maybe that if we want to engage really internationally with insurance companies, with pension funds, that we much more maybe have to go also to a sort of an exposed approach by which we have projects already implemented and we sell the loans that we have on our balance sheets to these investors. Yeah? So the multilateral development banks are quite good in preparing and implementing projects. So keep on doing that, or get extra resources through a capital increase or through additional private resources to prepare and implement projects. And once they're implemented, normally within the World Bank our loans are 15 to 35 years and they're sitting not completely idle on our balance sheet because we still go to capital markets and try to get resources from them. But these type of resources, these type of assets, we could actually sell to long-term financial institutions such as insurance companies and pension funds. So that's a sort of a complement which maybe will come around over the next few years to the cascade approach.
Thank you. I know the G20 on the focus on infrastructure investment has tasked the World Bank Group to look at those kind of issues. So finally, maybe Gail, would you like to comment on the gender?
Sure. I didn't want to hijack the panel with it. So quite simple. If we say the SDGs are a potential investment opportunity of 12 trillion, so investment opportunity, new growth. Okay, new growth beyond what could be there, 12 trillion. And if you haven't seen anything about the Business and Sustainable Development Commission, I encourage you to go and have a look. We're closed now, but go and have a look at the website. There's all sorts of really interesting stuff there. Right, but the gender, so gender inclusion in economic development is worth double that. And I think this is a figure from the World Bank. 28 trillion opportunity if we get more women engaged in economic activity. So the question was, how can we go beyond empowerment? I don't see anything to do with I don't think anything about gender is to do with empowerment. It's around how do you get more women engaged in economically active opportunities. Because that changes everything, and we can start from education to small businesses to large businesses to, you know, head of whatever. And then not to do purely a woman exclusion gender thing. It's about gender balanced teams, because diverse teams, wherever you are, and we can do this across all sorts of other things, including, you know, religions but gender balanced teams creates completely different results. And I think, again, I'd encourage you to have a look at some of the work that's been put out by the Business Commission, because you'll find it very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps we should have another panel on that at some point. Okay, so I'd just like to thank the panel. I just wanted to, I mean, it's quite difficult to summarise, but I think I've taken away 3 key points. One is about, it's a system, holistic system, with lots of different players who have different comparative advantages, and actually we need to be very clear on those comparative advantages. And I like the concept of the relay race, also kind of singing from the same hymn sheet, and that there are changes required across the board. The importance of new approaches, so I enjoyed listening about the cascade approach and how that's driving change in the institution in terms of incentives. And I've also think that we've heard around the power of new instruments and thinking creatively. So the power of blending, for example, the EIB example there, the Turkish hospital there, on the social impact bonds or investment bonds. Social inclusion bonds, sorry. So anyway, without further ado, I think we've well overrun well, only slightly. I think we started quite late.
No, we started late.
Okay.
All
I
good.
want to thank the panel very much, and yes, with that, enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for coffee, and I urge you to come back in 30 minutes, because we'll be crossing live to Detroit to hear our final and our keynote speech. So see you in 30 minutes after your coffee. Bye-bye for now.